surpass penetrating and perfect karma. Is rarely met with, even in 100,000 million kalpas, having it to see and listen to remember and accept. I vow to taste the truth of the Tathagata's words.
Good morning. Oh, impermanence. You're literally in the midst of it. The stand also feels very impermanent. And I'm going to adapt as best I can. It's good to see everyone. Happy 2024. Let's start out by just saying hi to each other. Right? Do that. Just feel free. Say hi to everyone. Around you. All right. My name is Reverend Kieryu Liên Shutt. I want to thank the City Center Abbot, Mako here, and Tonto Tim for the invitation to speak today, and of course to thank Senior Dharma Teacher Paul Howler and Central Abbot David Zimmerman for being here. And sorry, this thing is a little hard for me. I'm going to focus now. And of course, I thank Vicki Austin, my teacher, and then Gail Fronsdahl also. And of course, though she's here in spirit, in fact, when I was told I was going to sit in the Sado seat, and it was X-person seat, of course, I thought Paul seat, I thought Blanche, because I'm used to Blanche being here. And then to have this like very high platform, I feel like in the Theravada tradition, you're not supposed to be in a high bed. And when I was told I was stepping up on here, I just feel like, wow, really a little uncomfortable for me. So sorry, let me adjust here in so many ways. All right. I really appreciate being the first one to give a talk here at City Center and in 2024, and with this new layout and all. And in some ways then, it's about, I would say, right or skillful view, which is the first of the Eightfold Path, of course. And I think it's kind of a New Year's thing too, to kind of start going, what is it that I want this year to be? How do I set my view, would you say, on how I'm going to do this year? Do people still do resolutions and thinking about anyone? Okay, right. All right. And I am going to be talking from my book, which came out in August, and thank you for the invitation to talk about it. It's called Home is Here, Practicing Antiracism with the Engaged Eightfold Path. So I'm going to start with the introduction here. I will say the book starts, and I'll say here also, with a content warning. And I will be saying some slurs. This is not an invitation to use slurs yourself, even if it's referring to you, just because it tends to can be activating for people. However, it goes with the book, and so I will be saying it in this context. So the introduction, the wholeness of life. Location, location, location. Where are you from? No, really. Where are you from? Hey, Chink, Go home. People like you shouldn't live in this neighborhood. I was in your country and saved your people. Why do you act like a white girl? You're a Twinkie, aren't you? Do people know what a Twinkie is? Raise your hand if you want me to explain. Okay, a Twinkie is a derogatory word for someone who is perceived to be Asian or yellow on the outside and white on the inside. A banana is another derogatory term. Buddhism came to America some 49 or 50 years ago. Don't you know this is the women's restroom? Fucking lesbian. In each moment, we are located by lineage and ancestry, by others, by ourselves, by sight, by perception, by differentiation, by discrimination, by institutions, by policies, by governmental structures, by systems of oppressions, by homophobia, by sexism, by genderphobia, by white supremacy culture, by racism, by erasure, by invisibilization, by exclusion, by inclusion, by equity, by love, with hatred, with fear, with anxiety, with love, with care, with tenderness, with joy. In isolation, in community, in belonging, in the world, in time, in space, in emptiness, in wholeness. As a Vietnamese American adoptee, 1.5 generation, immigrant, cisgender female, gender nonconforming, lesbian, Soto Zen priest, and in the late mid-years of a chronological life, I'm often located by others, as I don't always present or behave in ways people believe my social locations to be. For instance, I'm often asked as I enter a washroom, don't you know this is the women's restroom? Perhaps it could be because of my shaved head due to being a priest, but likely it's also because I have been non-conforming in the ways I've carried myself for most of my life, in gender and other socially prescribed manners. When I was in Vietnam in 2002 and traveling with Vietnamese and Vietnamese American friends, they would often ask me to stay in the van as they went in to negotiate the lodging price. This was due to the unofficial but commonly used tier pricing scheme. Lowest for current Vietnamese nationals, next level for Vietnamese in diaspora, and most expensive for foreigners. According to my friends, while my ethnic identity was visually apparent, the way I held myself was American. They felt that I exuded too much confidence and took up too much space compared to a typical Vietnamese female. For most of my life, I have had to be hyper-aware of my social locations wherever I am, especially of locations imputed on me by systems of oppression. By location, I mean a framing for how an individual is designated a position in specific systems, and with it, the assumptions and privileges, or lack of them, that come with it. This framing of locationality allows for an understanding that an identity always comes with embedded social power that can change depending on which system is operating in each moment of interaction with another, interpersonally and instructors. For instance, as an able-bodied Vietnamese American, I'm located in the down power position or location of less privilege within the system of white supremacy. Yet I am in the up power or more privilege location in ableism. Understanding one's location is important because depending on the embedded lack of or privilege of power, one's responsibility changes. I've tried to grasp solidly onto some of these locations at times, trying hard to be American or Vietnamese for others and for myself. At other times, I've tried rejecting locations, especially those imputed on me by others and by systems. I've done both in many ways, individually and with others, through academic studies, art, therapy, volunteerism, activism, and work as a social worker. Then finally, when my suffering couldn't be processed thoroughly through those means, I leaned into my Buddhist practice. At first, it was out of utter confusion. After my graduate studies, I went back to Vietnam for the first time after 28 years. I thought I was going home. But after 5 months, I realized that the home I envisioned was simply that, a vision carried from my past and my childhood. This threw me for a loop, and I came back to the United States utterly shaken. Who am I? Where do I belong? I've been practicing lay Buddhism for almost 6 years by then. With this shattering of old ideas about myself, I then decided to go to a monastery in Northern California to do some intensive meditation, chanting, and other Buddhist practices. Initially, my aim was a 3-month intensive retreat, and I ended up staying there for 3.5 years and ordaining as a priest to the Soto Zen tradition. Fast forward to more than 2 decades later, and with the years of practice and being a Buddhist and meditation teacher, I've developed a more complete sense of how to hold my experiences of social locations in ways that are more grounding yet responsive, fostering healing and restoration. So that's the beginning of the book, and I wanted to really talk about location. I think when I know from this view, I'm obviously in the literal up power position, very up power right now, and you all are lowlies. Online, maybe you're more directly, I don't know. But everything shifts, right? Depending on how we interact. Even though I'm literally higher than Paul, obviously being senior Dharma teacher, Paul has more power in the temple and also in social locations in the United States, right? So how we're located depends not just on our literal space, but who we turn to interact with. Now, yes, I did ask you to say hi to everyone, and that was also on purpose. So actually close your eyes for a minute and think back to when I asked you to say hi to people. Think about what was some of the drive or the motivation or the impetus for who you turn to, how you address people. What is the energetic sense? What are the motivations? Even think about what might have been some unconscious sense. All right, go ahead and open your eyes when you're ready. Anybody want to share any thing that came up for them about how you chose who to say hi to or didn't say hi to? Sure. Tell us your name.
Heiko. I chose to say hi to everybody I could see.
Okay. And would we say being in the Zen form, in the Zen no, literally, you didn't get up to go say hi to anybody?
No, I did not.
Yeah, so that's kind of like a form here. I mean, most people would think to get up. I almost said, feel free to get up, but then I thought that might be more chaos here. Anyone else want to share? Yes, what's your name?
Bushan.
Bushan, yes.
For me, I think it was just proximity.
Proximity. Okay, now think back. Who did we decide to sit next to, or where do we want to sit? And by that I don't mean just who, right? But also perhaps like I'm actually a little bit hard of hearing, so I sit close. But then also as a Vietnamese American, often I don't like to sit up front, right? And so I sit back, even though I have a sense of I need to move forward to be more visible, but I have to fight these kind of conditioning. And so we're taught how to locate ourselves all the time, and we're doing it all the time. And certain of us, depending on how much instruction you were given explicitly or implicitly, depending on the various social locations that you've grown up to, have more and more messages about how we should comport ourselves, right? And that's part of what we're taught, our conditioning. And then, some of it's perfectly fine. The issue is, are we aware of that? And then from that, how do we want to respond? How much of it is old and unconscious? And are we willing to examine that and then bring more consciousness to? Now, one way to also talk about saying hi, really, or the exercise of saying hi, is that for the Zen people in the room, you already probably know that there's a teaching for the Avatamsaka Sutra on the Indra's net, right? So it's described often as the universe is a net, and at each section in which the strands cross, there's a jewel. So at the nodes, there are jewels. And because of the nature of jewels, the way they're cut, they're faceted, they reflect. And so at each node, there's a jewel, and so each jewel reflects all the other jewels. Sounds lovely, right? And it is about our interconnectedness, how we reflect each other, impact each other. And it's a lovely image. Now, sometimes that's used, I think, to have the sense that, all the jewels should be the same. That equality is that we all should somehow be the same. Wouldn't you say? Maybe it's just me. Now, I want to really bring in that the oneness, when we want to talk about oneness of practice, that it's the strands, it's the net itself, is where we need to pay more attention. Not just on the individual jewels. The jewels are part of the net, so yes, we want to pay attention to the jewels. And depending on if your part of the net has more torn or have not historically been taking care of the strands so that they're broken or that they're weak, then perhaps more attention needs to be put on attending to the jewels in that area. How do we build the net again? How do we fix, when you look at cobwebs, especially those that seem like they are not attended to, or sections of it, you see a spider, right? When besides going to get the bug that they're going to eat, they're there repairing the nets. And so we want to think about, where is it that I don't pay enough attention to the net? If we're talking about oneness, am I just interested in the net around me or where I can. Right? And yet, the net, if we turn our view to not just be on the jewels, then we become stewards of the net. That the net becomes the thing that is more important, right? One way to talk about the net is what is the connection between us? How are those connections made? So, as I was writing this book, and really this book arose out of a call from students. I like to say this book did not start out as a book, it started out as a response. So in 2020, at the beginning of the pandemic, a lot of Asian American students called me up and said, hey, I need help. All this animus and violence against Asian Americans is really distressing. I'm afraid to leave my home. How can you support me? And so I actually have been developing these since 2017. I was at Generation X teacher conference that several of the people in the room were at. And it was right after yet another round of sexual misconduct in convert centers. And so the right use of power was brought in as a restoration model. And I love the right use of power, and I know we've done it here. And then I thought, wow, I've been to a lot of trainings in my priest career, and some other models always being brought in, nonviolent communication, and I love them all, really I do. And yet, there must be something in the teachings themselves. That's where I go when I have trouble. So I thought about it, and with the support of the Hamira Foundation, the Buddhist Foundation, I've been developing the Four Noble Truths to be what I call the engaged version as a restorative model. So in the restorative model, we start out by saying harm and harming has happened, not just that there's suffering in life. Because to restore anything, we have to acknowledge that there's been brokenness, that the values that we say that we uphold, the view that we say, oh, there's equality, there's equity. That when we hold these views and values, and when they're broken, we have to agree on that. So much of the conflict in the world arises out of disagreement about what is it that needs attending to, or is broken and needs to be fixed, wouldn't you say? And so it is really important that at the beginning of restoration is to acknowledge what is. So as I was doing these, I would say there are three what I call essential aspects to restoration. One is this, acknowledging what is, which, by the way, echoes the first noble truth, right? Harm and harming has happened, we have to acknowledge it. And then, knowing what shifts are especially needed and learning how to put those shifts into practice. And then the last, those are 2 and 3, by the way. So let's talk about knowing what shifts are especially needed. Which I will go to chapter 1 and just read you briefly. Okay, the engaged Four Noble Truths. We are complete and whole. By the way, Tim, I have no clock, so can you, or someone can give me a time check?
10:40.
10:40, thank you. The ring of a bell signaled it was my turn for Dokusan, an interview to discuss my practice with the Soto Zen master at this 500-year-old training monastery in Japan. I picked up a small mallet and struck the cast iron bell in front of me. One time, letting it ring. Then a second time. I rose and hurried down a long hall of tatami mats, the woven straw flooring in traditional Japanese living spaces, passing through the ihaido, a narrow room lined on both sides with rows of individual altars for deceased Sangha community members. They silently witnessed the swish of cloth as my long black priest robes rubbed back and forth around my ankles with each quick step. At the end of the hall, 3 steps rose up. I stopped at the bottom and performed a short gasho, bowing with palms touching and elbows out. Then in one swift motion, I grabbed the end of my zagu, or priest bowing cloth, laid it down on the tatami, and folded it into a square. I dropped down and started my full prostrations as quickly as possible, body crouched in child's pose, both hands outstretched and palms placed on the floor. Then, with symmetrical precision, hands raised past the ears and down again before rising to stand. I did this 3 times quickly, as is the custom, after which I refolded and slid the zagu back over my left wrist. One more quick gasho, and then I headed up those 3 stairs to my dokusan with Sake Harada Roshi, the abbot of Ho-Shinji Monastery in Obama, Japan. I entered the room ready to ask the central question of my life. I'd come to Japan after leaving the predominantly white convert Soto Zen Buddhist monastery in Central California, where I thought I would spend the rest of my life. When I had asked to be ordained after more than 8 years of meditative Buddhist practice, I felt a deep calling to live as a Buddhist monastic. But this did not come to be. I left the California monastery after 3.5 years there, heartbroken and confused about the racism I had experienced on both a personal and structural level. The persistent white supremacy culture of the monastery made it unsafe and did not support me as a Vietnamese American practitioner. This was true for many other people of color staying there as well. The experience was a huge shock to my understanding of Buddhism, Buddhist practice, and my sense of place in the world. As I made plans to leave that California monastery and figure out how to practice as a newly ordained priest, I was contacted by someone who studied under Sake Harada Roshi in Japan. They urged me to study with him as he was acknowledged as an enlightened Zen master. I'd only practiced Soto Zen in predominantly white convert settings in the United States, and I felt drawn to the practice in Japan, the birthplace of this sect, Buddhism. I'd been at Ho-Shinji for 3 weeks, trying to process my despair from having to leave California. There was another American at the monastery, a white woman. Instead of being someone I could connect with, she had harassed me, saying things like, "You're good for nothing. You're trash." And the way I thought about it, and I didn't put it, but I'll tell you, she also said, "You should die." And hissed whispers as we moved about the various ceremonies and tasks of the temple. I couldn't get away from her either. We were housed in the same nuns' quarter together. We had come to Ho-Shinji around the same time, so we had similar seniority, and we were the same height, so we were often paired together for ceremonies. Her hateful whispers seemed to follow me all over the temple. The racism I had experienced in California had followed me all the way to Japan. Entering the room for Dokusan with Sake Harada, I barely sat down before blurting out the quintessential question of my existence up to that moment. Why does hatred seem to follow me wherever I go? I asked. Sake Harada didn't hesitate. No hatred completely. K-N-O-W. No hatred completely, he answered. Then he grabbed the handbell to his right and rang it vigorously, signaling the end of my interview. I scrambled out of the room, doing the prostrations and bows in reverse order. My mind raced to make meaning of what had just happened. Nothing came. My mind had stopped. A koan in Zen practice is a story assigned by a teacher for you to work with. Various traditions have different ways of practicing with koans, but giving an answer to the teacher as part of the process is a commonality across sects. Now, how the teacher accepts or rejects the answer is part of the methodology of this practice. A well-known koan is, "At this very moment, what is your original face before your parents were born?" Many people think koans are paradoxes, but really they're stories to stop your mind, to bump it off its loop of incessant and well-worn patterns of thinking, planning, and processing. Koans open us to an understanding that's beyond habitual thinking. Life also gives us koans. For me, racism has been a koan I've turned over and over. Studying race theory was one of my answers to this koan. Other answers from my life have included activism and various work as a social worker focused on addressing the harmful results of racism. All these were good answers. In Zen, we like to say, the question is more important than the answer. Why? Because questions often come up at uncomfortable moments. Deep questions arise when we're faced with circumstances in which our coping mechanisms aren't working anymore. At such moments, transformational change is possible if we stay open to all answers, especially unexpected ones. The system of white supremacy centers whiteness, fragmenting us all into the delusion of separateness. Aware of this dynamic and its harm to people of color, I had to be careful not to simply search outside of myself for answers. Like many Asian Americans and other people of color, at some point I had to learn to value myself, reclaiming the validity of my own experience in any moment and in any condition. Buddhist practice over many years has supported me to return to knowing and trusting my wholeness. No hatred completely. That moment with Roshi stopped my mind from its habitual looping to try to understand racism. All my intellectual theories and years of anti-racist work didn't address my suffering in a useful way at this crucial point of my life. That moment stopped my frantic search to find some reason why hatred kept following me. We already know, right? Systems of oppression set it up. I already knew that from all my race theory and studies. What I needed was to attend to the hurt and harm from being the target of racism. In Buddhism, we practice to be able to find settledness and clarity that's not dependent on the conditions of the world. To find such settledness and clarity, we have to attend to our suffering in body, heart, and mind. The koan of racism was not just something I wanted to understand. What I really want, even now, is to heal from the hurt and pain I've carried. So the reason that I really developed the Engaged Four Noble Truths. Now, in Zen, we don't talk about the Four Noble Truths. They're not just implicit in all Buddhist teaching, but we don't specifically talk about it. And technically, the Eightfold Path is considered a Theravada teaching on how to be an arahat, right? A person who is enlightened develops the Eightfold Path. In Zen, we focus much more on the six paramitas as the behavior of a bodhisattva. And so that's partly why we don't hear the specificity of it so much. However, to me, the Eightfold Path is the fourth of the Four Noble Truths. By the way, the Engaged Four Noble Truth is hurt and harm has happened. Understanding, the second is how do we fully understand the causes and conditions for the rising of harm and harming, hurt and harm. And it's so similar to the classic Second Noble Truth. However, we focus much more on the systemic, right? We're still doing personal work to overcome racialization, but we focus on how we're not just, it's not like a self thing only, it's not only for me to overcome what are the impacts of racism or other oppressions have been on me. It's to understand that whole systems, right, are responsible for how I've conditioned, and therefore systems need to shift so that the healing is not just an individual healing, but a societal healing, right? And those are important. And then the third is, I like to say the good news of Buddhism, right? Is that there's agency. Where's the possibility to know that we have agency in the midst of hurt and harm? Possibly, of course, is the alleviation or the end of suffering. And then the last is the Eightfold Path. Right? Now, knowing those shifts, I think, the really, elegantness of the Eightfold Path is that it really lays out for us what it is that we can work on. Right? And so, as I said, I've laid it out as acknowledging what is, which is to, as the book is laid out in these three ways. The first part is seeing the world as it is. So how do we have a view of the world? And then also, how concentration, the meditative practice of concentration really helps us to settle. The Eightfold Path, well, there are 8 of them are broken into 3 sections, right? One is called the wisdom section, which is Skillful View, which is to understand the Four Noble Truths and karma. Recently I was thinking karma, of course, broadly is cause and effect, and it's very complicated, all in all. But one way to think about karma is that it's habitual tendency, right? Or habitual motivation, or unconscious energy, the way in which we are conditioned and we act in certain ways and we behave in certain ways and we speak in certain ways. We are conditioned, and not all conditioning is bad, by the way, right? So much of the form in the Zendo, you think is just like bowing to the seat and then we all turn right, right? We're being conditioned, but it's in a way to help us all move together as one body. Then you don't bump into somebody and then you have to say, oh, sorry, and then you break the silence of the Zendo, right? And so you break everyone else's concentration. So just because things are conditioned and we're taught forms doesn't make it bad. The idea is, are we conscious of how we're conditioned, and are they useful now? Right? They might not have been useful then. In fact, in racism, so many of our parents taught us ways of dealing with the impact of racism. Right? You've heard about how, in particular, black male children, really are set down by their parents to talk about how they have to be very careful, how they hold themselves, how they talk to certain people, especially cops, in certain areas, very specifically, of course, the white people. When I was in Vietnam, My mother would teach me how to move out of the way when a GI was coming our way, right? So we're taught these things, and the idea is that it's for our safety. Our parents often taught us things for our safety. And of course it can go the other way around, if you're taught that certain people of color are unsafe, and so you shouldn't interact with them. Right? And so the issue is, how do we examine how we've been conditioned and are they useful for us anymore? Is there safety issues in the moment that we have to be attended to? At times, it certainly is true. And for some of us, more than others. So it's not in itself a bad thing. But the key is it useful now? Is it true in this moment, in each moment that you are at? Right? So we want to work on that. And then the second is when we shift to learning what shifts are needed, right? We want to go to what the world needs now, or to this book. Skillful motivation, which is actually thinking, skillful thinking. And in Buddhism, thinking is not passive. This is why the more popular translation of Sankappa these days is intention. You've heard of probably. I like motivation. And motivation, because to me, motivation does give you the sense that there's you think it, and then you're motivated to move, right? To do, to speak. And so it goes actually into the second third, which is what's usually called the ethical conduct section. I like to call it the compassionate conduct section, which is skillful speech, skillful action, and skillful livelihood. This is the interactive part, right? How we speak. Skillful action is essentially the 5 precepts, and then skillful livelihood. How do we use the energy of our life? Not just for work, though it is about work in the teachings. What kind of jobs are, more wholesome than others? In the book, we bring in the meditative factors of skillful effort and skillful mindfulness into that. And then realizing the wholeness of the world. This is where we get to learning how to put these shifts into practice, which is really part 2 and part 3. So we want to realize the wholeness of the world by living by the precepts, right? Skillful action, which I have reframed as skillful enactment. Because to me, enactment gives us a sense that it's not just the precepts I have to memorize and, decide whether I'm doing it right or wrong, good or bad, or other people, but it really is, to me, echoes the sense of vow. Right? I'm vowing to enact what I hold true, the values that I hold, right? The precepts. How do I bring those into my life? How do I act on those? Recently I just finished a whole series of the precept studies for 8 months, and someone I talked to in practice discussion said to me, we just finished, and so they get to write their own at the end version, so that's in their own words. By the way, I got that from Vicki Elston, my teacher, so I passed it on to my students. And then I do a little, actually I have a sample here when I was working it out. I print it out for them, or I lay it out, and then I send it to them these days, of course. And so, I say other people put them up, so you can look at the precepts all the time, right? And so this person said they were so mad about something, so mad. And then they looked at their precept, and their wording was, I'm paraphrasing, like, I vow that when I'm angry, to really examine my anger and find where is their compassion. And so when they looked at that, they just thought, okay, where can I have compassion there for myself and for the person I'm mad at? And they said that made everything. They gave them a moment. It's kind of like stopping the mind. It's another version of stopping the mind. Right? From its habitual loop of whose fault is it? Why am I not getting what I need? Or whatever your thing is that makes you angry. Right? It stops you, and then it says, recenters. So this is my value here. Right? This is where my enactment is. I'm going to enact this by pausing, thinking it through, and recalibrating how I want to be in the world and with another. And they said, wow, that was amazing. And I didn't think that it would be such a thing, right? Here we go. Impermanence strikes again. So, I'm a little frustrated here, but that's okay. All right. So, and then skillful living. What is the energy you want to put behind it? All right, I am way behind on my stuff, so I'm just going to end. Here we go. I'm going to end actually with a chapter with Dr. Roshi there. And then we'll take some questions. The day after that mind-stopping meeting in Japan, Sekihara Roshi offered me another chance for a dokusan. I rang the bell, did my bows, and went into the practice discussion room, ready to share my insights about how this answer had affected me. Before I could open my mouth, Roshi launched into a lengthy story of Shakyamuni Buddha's life and enlightenment, along with the histories of other early Buddhist ancestors. 30 minutes. Then once again, he rang me out of the room. We never spoke about my question again. This event impacted me deeply, and I continued to turn it over for many years afterward. When I remember my dokusans with Sekihara Roshi, this last part has always puzzled me. I often wondered, what was his point about it all? In writing this now, I have an understanding of what he was teaching me. The Buddha and ancestors were searching for the same things as you and me. The end to suffering. I think Roshi was saying that there can't be spiritual bypass. He realized, and after that initial exchange, I too realized that I was looking for a way to explain away the hurt and pain by wanting to discuss it. Discussion isn't wrong. Theory isn't wrong. Activism isn't wrong. But we can't use these things for spiritual bypass. I should also add zazen isn't wrong. We can't use Buddhist practice or any methods, such as race theory or activism or zazen, as a way to skip over the human condition inherent in the First Noble Truth, experiencing the hurts and pains of our lives. Trying to get away from them via any method is to try and skip over or bypass fully experiencing our life as it is. Our practice is to get closer and closer to know it completely. Because in doing so, we can actually then have more clarity on how we can heal. In Pali, the first recorded language of Buddhism, the term Yonaso Manasakara is usually translated as wise attention. It can also be translated as attention that takes the whole into account. This is what Sekihara Roshi was pointing me toward. The practice of investigating dukkha, which sees it in context, in totality, in the whole net, right? Not just the jewels, and not just the hurt and pain of the moment. Then, the rest of the Engaged Four Noble Truths offers us descriptions and practices for how to connect or reconnect to the wholeness of life. That our existence is seen, relevant, healable, and valued. When we remember and access the contexts that validate us and support us to thrive, not just survive, but to thrive. Additionally, we need to remember that all beings want the same thing: to be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. This is what connects us all. Denying that systems of oppression exist is to deny reality as it is. Learning to negotiate these systems with self and collective determined agency is the practice of engaged liberation. In practicing collective liberation, this is what I wish for us: that we may come home to a sense of wholeness, grounded in what is safe and of value to all. May we then aspire to spread that out, to work together to strengthen safety and care for each other. This is the work and the liberation of understanding, practicing, and developing the engaged truths. Thank you for your attention. Kevin, can you give me a time check again, please?
It's 11:07.
Okay.
We're having some audio problems, so if, Leanne, actually your microphone is the only one that's working right now.
Okay.
So when people ask questions, if you could repeat them so the online folks.
Sure, no
that would be
problem.
helpful.
Thank you.
So no microphone to pass around. Does anybody have a question? Yes.
How do you, I guess observation in the universe. I think it's an observation question. I like the way you frame harm.
You, my friend.
Harm is being done.
Uh-huh.
And what I find, especially currently in the secular world, in the Middle East, and there's folks involved, and the social conversations is, there's almost a competition of harm. Right? Is so what's the Buddhist approach?
Yeah. Oh. It's really, thank you for your question and for your, I can hear that's a deep question for you. So just to repeat and correct me if I'm wrong. One is that you appreciate the framing of the first noble truth as harm and harming has been done. And then how to address the harm in the world, especially right now in Palestine. So first I will say that it takes courage to practice Buddhism. I mean, most of us come to practice, at least I know I did, being raised in the area, right, in the United States or US culture, for the most part. And certainly I started meditation intensively when I moved here in 95. We come to it for the calmness, that concentration. Okay, that's the result of concentration, is bodily ease and calmness of mind. Right? And yet the harder work is actually all the other parts of the Four Noble Truths, right? The practice instruction of the First Noble Truth is to investigate hurt and harm. And this is why there's a sense, and part of this one, right? Mr. Yes. Question is that it seems like I don't actually want to say a certain term for the area, because it's an oppressive term, for what's happening in Palestine between and Israel, is that there seems to be a fight about whose harm is bigger, right? And so, and what is the Buddhist answer? That's your question. So, one is, I will say, as long as you frame everything in duality, then there's always opposition, right? There's right and there's wrong. There's how much harm than comparison. If we keep on comparison, then duality usually is set up as comparative, right? Or one aspect, one big aspect. Right? And so if we keep doing that, then it just keeps escalating and becomes a fight, right? It's like we've all heard this. When you fight with someone, you go to your therapist. Or maybe you're just a good friend. Maybe a Dharma teacher and say, oh, are you trying to be right? Or are you trying to connect? Right? And that's similar, right? If we keep thinking, fighting for who's right, then chances of resolution doesn't happen so much. However, what is important though, and what is key here, and I think what is different about the courses that this book was written for, the Dharma being anti-racist and Lotus rising from the mud, is that I'm framing it as not, so much of training on race, anti-racism, which, or nationalism, is about how to understand other people, right? And I think that's useful, without a doubt. Right? However, what really is needed is how do we make room for other voices to tell us what is their hurt and harm, and to take that in and give it as much value as we think our hurt and harm. And the irony of that, though, is that you have to heal your own harm. This is why this book is written mostly for people of color. It's written actually for everyone, and everyone is affected by white supremacy culture or nationalism, and or oppressive nationalism. So we have to heal from that. Because when we can attend to our own hurt and pain, then we have the space to really look up and see other people's hurt and pain and give it as much value. If there's a culture in which my pain needs to be seen, and it's continually pushed down, then it makes it hard for it to. Then it becomes that this harm is bigger than this harm. This is why so much of the ceasefire work is about we're for peace here. How do we all, if we all want peace, not about both groups, and usually in any war, both groups have had equal amount of historical, or I don't know about equal amount, but extreme amounts of historical denigration, oppression. And so if we think of it as continually upping each other, then the fight continues. So that's one. Two, I will say that, the more and more I practice, right, in Buddhism, there's what's called the two wings of Buddhism. One is the wisdom, and one is the compassion. And sorry, students, you've seen this already. So there are two wings, right? And one is wisdom, and one is compassion. Now, for a bird to fly, right, both wings have to have strength. If you're not, so that's strength. However, if we depend too much on wisdom, what happens? We just fly in a circle this way. If we depend too much on compassion, what happens? We fly too much in a circle this way. However, we do need to have strength in both and the wisdom of discernment to know which side needs a little bit more effort to direct us in the direction we want to go. So at times, we over-depend on one or the other, or we don't give ourselves or another as much credence. I know a lot of time when I'm fighting with somebody or I have a disagreement, I perseverate on the facts. I know right now there's a lot of stuff about what the facts are this and the facts are that, and the important line, especially the way the internet is these days. It doesn't take away the importance of things, it just means part of our practice is to realize when have we fallen too much on the one side or the other. Our practice is to find the equanimity, to have a sense of not being overwhelmed, right? By either one or the other. Where's the middle way of any duality? right? Or any sense of when duality is set up. Does that answer your question? Is that too Buddhist? Okay, thank you. All right, any other, do we have time for one more or not?
One more short one.
One more short one. All right, I will just pause though because the two people talked before. So is there anyone who hasn't spoken who would like to speak? Thank you though for your wish to engage. And I invite anyone who usually hesitate to move forward. All right, your name?
Justin,
Hmm.
what do you do when the harm is irreparable?
Irreparable.
Yeah, or when you've been harmed by one person and it might be related to structural things,
Mm-hmm.
but that person isn't going to give any sort of amends or whatever.
Yeah. So this is why, the question is, what do you do when harm has been done to you by an individual, even though there's structural stuff behind it, and that person isn't gonna
Fix it.
fix it? Given in any way, is what you said.
I give any amends is what I
Oh, give any amends. Yeah, this is the hard part about restoration, is that we want amends, and they don't often come. Because the problem is, for someone to amend, they have to agree on what the issue is, to acknowledge what is the harm. And many of us, even though, how many of you, when I said harm and harming happened, you're just like shrunk a little bit? Like, that sounds like a lot. Suffering can sound like a lot, but harm and harming, like, I don't do that, I don't do that, And so part of our practice going, no hatred completely. How do I turn towards how harm, and I'm part of that? So two things I would say. One is that hopefully the structure will then move up, right? And if you have gone towards a structure and they refuse to do anything, the other hard thing is, part of discernment and wisdom is to know when the environment that you're in is toxic. And so it's not going to give you the restoration you need. They might later, hopefully they will later, and at some point you have to decide, is this more hurt and harm is happening, especially from denial of the hurt and harm. And then two is to find others who support you, so that you don't feel isolated. Part of any oppressive, genocidal, I'll just use that word now, oppressive system is that they fragment us. They silence us. They create conditions in which it feels unsafe to speak their truths. And that falls on the people who have the power of any organization or system to really understand, right? Many years ago when I was bringing someone in to help with anti-racist work in an organization, that person said, we'll start out by talking to everyone in the Sangha about how we see this. And then the upper echelon will say, well, what are you going to do? What's your methodology? And they're like, no, we talk to everyone first. Because from there, we figure out what needs to happen. Many of us want whole systems to come in and fix everything, but things don't get fixed. It helps to have a curriculum, to have some layout. But what has to happen is that everyone has to be willing to do the work. And if the people in power aren't willing to do the work or create an environment in which this kind of work is valued and important, then it's never going to change. And so that toxic environment, you have to see, that's hurt and harm right there. And it's that part of the net, I can't do it myself. So how do I get support, and then how do I perhaps bring in ways to attend to the net in that way? Yeah, thanks for your question. Thank you. All right, I know I'll be respectful of the time. Thank you.
May our intention equally extend to every being and place with the true merit of Buddha's way. Beings are numberless. I vow to save them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless. I vow to enter them. Buddha's way is unsurpassable. I